You've probably also heard the phrase signal and noise. If you're trying to use a radio telescope to study a distant galaxy, what you want to do is intensify the signal and remove the noise so that you can really get what you're trying to focus on. But when you're listening to a human being make a presentation, that's not a good idea. Because if the signal is the content, the noise is the context. It's the human being in the world, it's the solution in society, it's figuring out where this works in the real world and who I am as I'm presenting it to you. So listen for both as we now go into the Orcel and Neptune Awards. 15 minutes, and it's a soft stop, unlike the big pitch. If somebody's running a little over 15 minutes, we just deduct it from their Q&A period. We're going to bring microphones up here in the front and set them up so that there'll be microphones along the front here where you can step up and ask a question. Encourage you to ask questions because your job is to, as the judges did in the big pitch, draw the people out, make sure everyone understands. If you have something that you're not quite understanding, I guarantee you that probably 2/3 of the room is with you in trying to understand it. So make sure that you do the questions, find out what's going on. It'll make it better when you go out to the tables afterwards and have your round table talking about the solutions. We do 2 solutions at a time. So we're going to do the first 2 now. And we're going to begin with number 1. Blue Ocean Gear, and presenting is Courtney Opshog. Courtney? And you've got your...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Courtney Opshog. I'm the CEO of Blue Ocean Gear. We're seeing more and more that technology can be used to resolve some of the ocean's most pressing issues. But one problem that still exists and still persists is that of lost fishing gear. This is a global problem. None of our world's oceans are immune. And the impacts on the economy and also the environment are just enormous. And because gear continues to be lost every year, it's a problem that's still growing. And so while there's very effective and successful marine debris removal programs and lost fishing gear removal programs, we want to go and actually address the problem at its source and try to prevent lost gear from happening in the first place and keep our oceans healthier moving forward. So we'll start by talking about trap fishing. So traps are used to fish for crab and lobster and other species. And oh, I'm sorry, I guess, is this not on then? Or I can use this too. Okay, absolutely fine. So one of the first fishermen that we started working with was Dick Ogg. He's a commercial Dungeness crab fisherman in Bodega Bay, California. And he's been fishing for well over 20 years. He sets about 350 traps out off his boat every season, and each trap costs about $250. So he spends about a little over $50,000 on his gear. But every fishery is different, the configurations are different. Some fishermen fish 100 all the way up to 800 or even 1,000 traps off their boats, and they can cost all the way up to $1,700 for the big ones that they use up in Alaska. So the point is that fishermen have a lot of money invested in their gear. And the way that this fishery works, it's a fixed gear fishery, which means that they set their gear at the beginning of the season, and it's harvested periodically throughout that season. So it's often left unattended for a great percentage of the time, and that puts it at risk for loss due to things like strong currents, storms, hurricanes, entanglements by boats or by whales, a lot of things that are out of a fisherman's control. A couple of years ago, we had an El Nino season, and Dick himself lost about 60 traps that year. Trap fishermen on average around the world lose between 10 and 30% of their gear every season. It's an enormous amount of gear lost to our oceans. And sometimes it's even higher. During Hurricane Irma last year, 125,000 spiny lobster traps were washed away in Florida. So this is a lot of gear that gets lost every season. And the fishermen can spend between $10,000 and $100,000 replacing that gear every year. So that's a significant expense on their part. Plus, it's the time and the fuel that they've spent searching for that gear, which they may or may not find. The thing about this problem is that it's actually easy to not think about or ignore because it's what's happening we don't really see it, but it's what's happening below the surface that's where the real damage is being done. Because these traps continue to fish. It's what they're designed to do. So the crab and lobster that continue to be captured by the trap are never harvested. They just become bait for more crab and lobster and other fish to enter. And again, never harvested, so this can deplete a fishery's stocks. It's devastating to our ecosystem and our environment. We can actually use our fishing industry as an indicator for the health of our fisheries. In the Chesapeake Bay, they removed 34,000 blue crab traps over the period of several years, and their annual harvest after that effort went up by over 13,000 metric tons, or $21 million. And that's just blue crab, and that's just in the Chesapeake Bay. So imagine the potential if we removed the issue of ghost fishing from our oceans worldwide. So what if we could actually prevent ghost fishing or lost fishing gear from happening in the first place? So Blue Ocean Gear's developed a smart buoy to allow fishermen to track their gear and know if it starts to become lost, they know where to go and get it. So how are we doing this? We're putting GPS on a trailer buoy that gets attached to their main buoy, or they could actually use it as a main buoy as well. I've shown a picture here on the left. That's one of our prototypes being fished out with a fisherman named John Meller. He fishes out of San Francisco. And he set a few of these out for us near Point Reyes. And the data gets back to the fishermen on shore. It gets displayed on a mapping display, so they can know where their gear is. And so that picture on the right is what I was seeing on shore, where all of the gear that he had set was. So how do we get that data from the gear to shore? Well, I have a picture of a satellite there, and there are a lot of companies that make satellite buoys, but they run about $5,000 a piece. And if I had told John that he had to spend $5,000 for every buoy that he used, he would very quickly stop listening. So we're taking advantage of the way that fishermen set their gear. They typically set them in strings of 10 or 20, and then a mile away they'll set another 10 or 20. And we can network those sets using lower cost communications methods to a central buoy for each set, and that sends the data via satellite back to shore. So what if one of them goes wandering or the network starts to break up? Well, this is a test that we ran out in Bodega Bay where we set several buoys out and purposefully moved one of them. And now if it moves, but it's still within transmission range, which is about over a kilometer, it'll start sending alerts. So that's the marker that turned red. If the fisherman knows that it still is around, they can go get it because they know the GPS coordinates. If it still continues to move outside of the transmission range, it will still continue to send alerts. It can be picked up by the next central buoy, or the fisherman, using the last known location, can put a receiver antenna on their boat and now be able to find that gear very quickly from a much further distance because of the increased line of sight from above the water. We've done scores of tests with our gear and prototypes out on the water, and every time we field test, we learn something new. And we've iterated our design several times. I've shown some of the previous prototypes, and then the image on the left is the design that we're working with right now, and that's been based on a lot of the feedback from the fishermen that we've worked with. They've really informed the design. And in order for them to adopt this type of technology, they said it had to have three things. It had to be low cost, it had to be compatible with their gear and their operations, and it had to be reliable. So we've addressed the low cost issue with our design of using the mesh network. In terms of compatible with their gear, again, they don't want to change out their gear. They've got a lot of money invested in that. So we've designed this to be attached as a trailer buoy, and it can be configured to work with a lot of different fisheries. And their operations, if you've ever seen a crab or lobsterman operate, it takes them less than 90 seconds to hook a buoy, haul up the trap, empty it, rebait, and reset, and then they're on to the next trap. So it's very tight operations. They want nothing that interrupts that. So our newest design is basically hands-off for the fishermen. So it's very simple and straightforward for them to use. And in terms of reliability, we're using basically off-the-shelf technology, and we've been doing a lot of field tests so that we can ensure the reliability of this design. And the really interesting part came that the more we started testing with them, as the fishermen began to see the power of the technology, they began to come up with other ideas of how this could be used. So for instance, a lot of times their gear gets sucked under by strong currents, and they'll make a trip out to haul in their gear, and they can't actually get to it because it's been sucked under. So they asked if it could be used to help them know when their gear is able to be harvested, and it can. The other issue is whale entanglements. A few of the fishermen that we work with are on the California Dungeness Crab Whale Entanglement Working Group, and they brought this up to the management agencies responsible for that, or handling those issues. One of the big problems is that when a whale gets entangled in fishing gear, it might be seen once but never again. In 2015, we had 61 whale entanglements off the west coast of California, and 55 were never seen again. And the rescue teams then don't know where to go to help them. So we've been now working with one of the management agencies, the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, to instrument these buoys in a slightly different manner so that we can actually do some testing on whether we can detect and locate whale entanglements. So it's really been great to see the fishermen get engaged and actually come up with other uses for the exact same technology. We've got a really unique team working on this. I've known my colleague Helen Shaughnessy since MIT, and we were both engaged in the National Marine Sanctuary's outreach efforts, which eventually led to the founding of this company. And we have, across the board, we've got a lot of depth in both technical expertise as well as experience with startups and larger companies. And we've always engaged the fishermen because they provide such valuable feedback and assistance with testing. In terms of our business model, we'll be, again, selling these in networked sets of buoys. And, and that helps keep our costs down. The real power actually comes from the software side of things, because now once we're sending that data back to shore, it can actually be recorded and used to provide some analysis for the fishermen, so they can know where they've fished over time, from season to season, where are they losing the most gear, so maybe find some hot spots for them to avoid. In terms of cost savings, if a fisherman with 300 traps has to replace their gear over time, they can spend between $90,000 and $600,000 over a 5-year period. Whereas instrumenting with smart buoys, the same set would cost them about $20,000. So it's between an 80 and 95% savings for them over that period of time. The gear can really pay for itself within 1 or 2 seasons. And we're looking at a higher purchase model, so a lease to buy, and that helps offset the upfront cost for the fishermen since they operate on such tight margins, especially at the beginning of the season. With over 7 million lobster and crab traps being fished in North America alone, we have a potential market of about $300 million in hardware and recurring software revenue on top of that. We've also been talking with adjacent technologies such as turbine energy folks that need to track their gear, and also aquaculture. But this doesn't even include the worldwide potential of, there's other fixed gear fisheries around the world, and other species as well. So there's a lot of potential for the business to expand. Our financial projections are lined up with our projected milestones. So we're planning for a product launch in 2019 following our pilot studies. And on the west coast of the US, and then following subsequent years will be a product launch on the east coast of Canada and the US. We've actually looked at a few different pricing models for this effort because every fishery is different, the configurations are different. Some fisheries, they have strings of traps that have 2 buoys on either end. Some are fishing single pot, single buoy configurations. Some folks will have higher risk than others, and so they'll maybe instrument some of their gear that's in the most susceptible areas for loss. So this is basically, it's an adaptable model though, so that we can adapt to any fishery that might be interested in using this technology. We've been gaining a lot of support both from fishermen as well as from management agencies, and that's really puts us in a sweet spot because oftentimes those 2 entities don't agree, but it's really what's needed to get traction in order to put this product on the market. Right now, the way to, one of the main ways that they find and retrieve lost gear is chance sightings by a fisherman or very expensive and time-consuming aerial or sonar surveys. And they're often many years after the gear has been lost. In terms of competition, there are, as I mentioned, satellite buoys or AIS buoys for tracking. They tend to be on the much more expensive side. There is likely competition from adjacent technologies such as vessel tracking or ropeless or pop-up buoys. They're really designed for specific purpose, though, and the the focus really for this field has been on, again, low cost, reliable, and compatible. And so that's where we've really focused our efforts. And we've actually been approached by companies in both of those sectors to partner so that we can have a stronger package to offer for customers. We've taken every step that we can to protect our IP, and we're looking to be the first to market for this type of networked technology for the fishing industry. Up till now, we've been awarded several grants in order to do our prototype testing R&D, and have moved on to working on contracts with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, as well as a project in Canada to test these out for the whale entanglement detection. And we've developed key partnerships along the way. I particularly want to point out the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, again, pointing out that this is a very global problem. There's a lot of folks working on it, and that organization has provided a lot of great connections for us. If we're fortunate enough to move forward with ocean exchange funding, this would allow us to increase the number of buoys out on the water. We already have at least 4 fisheries lined up who really want to keep their gear in line, and this would allow us to try this in different configurations, different fisheries, and start to get metrics back on amount of gear that's possible to retrieve using it as well. So really be able to learn from the deployment of these buoys. And these line right up with the UN sustainability goals, particularly reducing marine pollution. There's a study done at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It was actually 46% fishing gear. So we're really looking to help prevent this from the source moving forward. And we want to allow fishermen to be part of the solution. Again, the more engaged they get, the more they see the power of this happening. They can actually demonstrate the sustainability of their methods and really help keep our oceans cleaner. And we'll be using the software, as I mentioned, to kind of gain more knowledge about how the fishing industry interacts with the environment so that we can have a clear idea moving forward of what are the most sustainable ways to go forward with that. So using our smart buoy technology, we can really, again, engage the fishermen in a solution to help keep our oceans healthier while still supporting our fishing industry. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was great.
I didn't know this was an sorry.
So we have microphones on either side of the stage and here in front, so please come up with your questions. And I have one to start. What's the lifetime of one of these buoys?
That is still being worked out, but it would likely end up longer than, because of the materials that we're using to do our current design, it would end up being a little bit longer than their current foam buoys.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Got a question? Right here in front? It's yours.
Good morning, nicely done. I'm very happy to see a NOAA logo up there. That was great. So I understand that your focus is from the fishermen to help them remain economically viable by finding their derelict gear, or not derelict, but just finding their gear. But one of the big issues that we have, dealing with personally right whales and loggerhead sea turtles is entanglement from derelict gear. So do you have a mechanism in place or a future thought for helping with that?
So you're asking about the difference for entanglements not with actively fished gear,
Right.
but with the gear that's already been lost.
Right.
Yeah, I think that this would end up, the gear that's already out there isn't instrumented, but I think this is, the purpose of this is actually to prevent derelict gear from moving forward. The majority of entanglements have appeared to happen with active gear, but yes, there is a large number that still happen with derelict gear as well. And so I think if a trap or a buoy is instrumented with this technology, it would definitely indicate there's actually, again, we're putting additional sensors on, but the primary methods of knowing that if a whale has taken a set of gear is the distance moved and the velocity, and that we can get from the GPS sensor alone. And so, yeah.
So I have another question, which is, you talked about the entanglement question. Say you find one that's moving at the speed that would indicate it had been entangled with a whale.
Right.
What do you do?
1-800-SOS whale.
Really?
Is actually the number you call. Yes, there are whale rescue teams.
Wow.
Now they're in different fisheries. There are different protocols, but yeah, the action is typically to call the rescue team, and now we can actually provide them with a GPS coordinate of where to go. Right now, their very first action when they get out there is to put a very expensive buoy, another buoy on the whale, which sometimes they can't even do because it would make their situation much worse.
Sure.
But they really want to be able to stay with that whale so that they don't lose it. And so we thought, well, why not just instrument the gear?
That's amazing.
So,
All right. Jim?
Yeah, I have a question about the sort of lost gear. How much of the time is the gear lost and separated from the buoy? And does this, I mean, if that happens, is it you're out of luck? I mean, this solution doesn't help them, or so? What's the typical?
that's a good question. Yeah, there's not a lot of data on how much gets separated, and it really does depend on the fishery. There are certain places, like for instance in inshore Maine, that there's a lot of boat traffic and a lot of gear all set close together. They're more likely to get sliced by a boat propeller. In other regions, it is much more likely, for instance, in Washington or in Florida, washed away by storms. And in that case, it typically remains attached. But even if it does get separated, this is still useful because, again, it's the buoy and rope can still entangle animals, can still a threat for boats as well as marine mammals. So it's still good to pick that up, but it also provides a starting point for then dragging and finding the associated trap. So.
Hey, Courtney. So I have a question about the data and insurance for the fishing industry, since they're on such thin margins. Right. Having a system like yours, is this helping the fishing community reduce their premiums? That also helps with adoption, or is that where you're looking for in terms of helping to get a stronger adoption and therefore impact into the community?
Yeah, we haven't yet spoken with marine insurance companies, but that is one of our next steps because it's kind of like the LoJack for their fishing gear. If it does have the ability to track available, then those fishermen that have they have more insurance on knowing where their gear is, and so yeah, there would be ways to offset the upfront cost with that as well.
Anything else? Okay, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.